The dust swirled around the wooden platform as Samuel adjusted his worn hat, squinting against the harsh afternoon sun. Willow Creek wasn't much of a town, just a handful of buildings clustered around the railroad tracks, but today it buzzed with unusual activity. Word had spread about the peculiar auction taking place in the town square. Samuel had come to town for supplies, not entertainment. As a logger working the remote mountain forests, he rarely ventured into civilization. His calloused hands and weathered face told the story of a man who found companionship in the whisper of wind through pine trees rather than the chatter of townsfolk. "What's all the commotion?" he asked the blacksmith, who was wiping his hands on a greasy apron. "Some traveling merchant's got himself in debt," the man replied with a shake of his head. "Says he'll auction off his daughter, I suppose. Strange business, if you ask me. Poor girl's got a sack over her head, some say she's too hideous to look upon." Samuel's jaw tightened. The very idea turned his stomach. He'd been raised by a mother who taught him that every soul had worth, regardless of their appearance. As he watched the small crowd gather around the platform, he felt a familiar anger rising, the same fury that had driven him to defend the weak since childhood. On the platform stood a nervous man in a dusty suit, constantly mopping his brow with a handkerchief. Beside him, a slight figure in a simple brown dress stood perfectly still, a burlap sack covering her head. Her hands were bound loosely with rope, but Samuel noticed something the others didn't: her posture wasn't one of defeat. Despite everything, she held herself with quiet dignity. "Now, gentlemen," the merchant called out, his voice cracking slightly, "I need to settle my debts quickly. This young woman needs a home. The bidding starts at 50 cents. Several men in the crowd chuckled and made crude remarks. Samuel's hands clenched into fists as he heard their comments about what they might do with such a bargain. One particularly loud man with a gold tooth shouted, $1. Might be worth it for the entertainment." The woman's shoulders tensed almost imperceptibly, but she remained silent. $1.50, called another voice from the back. Samuel found himself stepping forward before he could think. His mother's voice echoed in his memory, "Samuel, there will be times when you must choose between what's easy and what's right. Always choose right, son." $2, he said quietly, but his voice carried clearly across the square. The crowd turned to look at the tall, bearded stranger. The merchant's eyes lit up. $2 was more than he'd dared hope for. $2. Going once, going twice. The gavel came down with a sharp crack. "Sold to the gentleman in the black hat." As Samuel approached the platform, he pulled out 2 worn dollar bills and handed them to the merchant, who quickly pocketed the money and hurried away without another word. The crowd began to disperse, some looking disappointed that the spectacle was over. Samuel found himself alone with the woman on the platform. Up close, he could see her hands trembling slightly. She was small, barely reaching his shoulder, and he wondered what circumstances had led her to this moment. "Ma'am," he said gently, "I'm going to untie your hands now. You don't need to be afraid." His fingers worked carefully at the ropes, and when they fell away, she rubbed her wrists but still didn't speak. "My name is Samuel," he continued, his voice as soft as he could make it. "I have a cabin about 10 miles north of here. It's not much, but it's clean and safe. You can stay as long as you need to figure out what you want to do next." "I won't. I mean, you don't owe me anything. I just couldn't stand by and watch this happen." Still silence from beneath the sack. Samuel reached up slowly, telegraphing his movements so she wouldn't be startled. "May I?" A barely perceptible nod. He lifted the burlap sack carefully, and what he saw took his breath away, not because she was hideous, as the crowd had assumed, but because she was beautiful in a way that had nothing to do with perfect features. Her dark hair was tangled and her face was streaked with tears, but her eyes held a depth of intelligence and strength that spoke of someone who had endured much but hadn't been broken. "I'm Elena," she whispered, her voice hoarse from hours of silence. "And I," Thank you. Samuel smiled, the first genuine smile he'd worn in months. It's nice to meet you, Elena. Are you hungry? There's a decent restaurant just down the street. Over coffee and simple food, Elena's story emerged slowly. She had been traveling with her uncle after her parents died, but he had gambling debts and had grown desperate. She had agreed to the auction hoping whoever bought her might at least be kinder than the men her uncle owed money to. I was so scared, she admitted, wrapping her hands around the warm cup. But when you spoke, your voice was gentle. I thought maybe God hadn't forgotten about me after all. Samuel found himself telling her about his lonely cabin, his work in the forests, and his simple but peaceful life. He spoke of his dreams to build something more, maybe a small farm, a place where he could raise a family someday. As the sun set behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, Samuel realized something had shifted in his heart. This woman, whom others had seen as damaged goods, had awakened something he'd thought was dead, hope for a future that wasn't solitary. 6 months later, as Elena walked down the aisle of the small church in Willow Creek, Samuel marveled at how $2 had purchased the most precious thing in his life, not Elena herself, but the chance to love and be loved in return. The woman behind the veil had indeed been beautiful, but her true beauty lay in her courage, her kindness, and her capacity to see the good in a stranger who had shown her mercy. Their love story became legend in Willow Creek, a reminder that sometimes the most valuable treasures come disguised as worthless goods, and that true love sees with the heart, not the eyes.